You can see that in the eye orbits as well. And so if you are iron deficient anemic, you develop this pathological condition called cribra orbitalia. Or here's a very severe case from another Spanish mission showing the top of this guy's skull is called parotid hyperostosis due to severe iron deficiency anemia. And I'm willing to bet that populations today in Latin America, if I studied their skull, I'd see the same thing in those populations. Now we know that that's a signature of iron deficiency because we've looked at the microscopic anatomy of the skull. Work I'm doing with Michael Schultz at the University of Göttingen in Germany. It shows the same. This is the morphology of an iron deficient person. The area where red blood cells has expanded tremendously, and this is what it looks like microscopically. These are sand particles, by the way, that have nothing to do with the iron deficiency. So let's look at these 4 time periods. For adult women, very, very low frequency, and we actually kind of expected that because these pathologies develop only in children. They don't develop in adults. So if you're an iron deficient adult, you don't develop those bone changes. Only in juveniles while the skeleton is rapidly forming. Adult men, there's a slight increase in both sexes, but predictably it's very low because you don't see the development of the pathology in adults. But look at what's taken place in kids, juveniles. Very low prior to European contact. Then it goes out of sight. Most juveniles have these pathologies. That is, most juveniles are severely iron deficient in these Spanish missions. And I think that's due to eating corn, for one thing. But I think it's also due to parasitic infections that will also cause iron deficiency anemia in these very horrible living conditions in Spanish missions. So the key point here is the record of children. They're a very sensitive indicator of health generally in a population. Okay, so basically health declines all the way throughout the history of this region. Greatly declines with the arrival of Europeans. Now that's the first part of my story, and the second part, much shorter, talking about lifestyle. What can we learn about lifestyle? We know that historically the Spanish employed, so to speak, native populations to raise crops. And so we have a couple of indicators in our toolkit, bioarchaeological toolkit, to study lifestyle. One of these is osteoarthritis, a disease, a disorder that all of us will eventually have. In our own population, it doesn't really begin until the 50s. In most of the populations I've looked at, prehistoric societies, it begins in the teen years, as early as the teen years, because they start working hard when they're teenagers. Actually, we're unusual. We have such a cushy existence. When you were a teenager, if you weren't out there digging in fields and raising crops and carrying things and so forth and so on, you were playing with your Game Boy and bugging your parents and telling you to quit watching TV and so forth and so on. I know because I have an 11-year-old son and I'm telling him that all the time. Get away from the TV. But basically the skeleton is remarkably sensitive in terms of physical labor. And we've been looking at all the articular joints of the skeleton. All the movable articular joints are subject to osteoarthritis. You move that joint in a physically demanding way. Say, for example, you play football. Your knees they're gone by the time you're 30 or 40. I don't know how those guys walk. It does such damage to the knees. If you're a tennis player, what it does to your elbow, really gross stuff, your shoulder. We're not really built to be professional tennis players, baseball players, football players. We're not designed to do that. And so we're looking at all these articular joints. Osteoarthritis is basically caused by continuous wear and tear on an articular joint. This is what it looks like in the spine, the lower back, the lumbar vertebra. It's just build up a bone here If you want to know what it looks like this. This could have been painful, maybe not. There are different thresholds of pain that I've seen with patients and patient records in terms of what looks like severe osteoarthritis. They claim no discomfort, or what looks like very simple osteoarthritis. They claim great pain. This is what it looks like in the elbow, the humerus, the upper arm joint, these big buildup of bone here, and a polished surface right here where the cartilage has entirely disappeared. That's what happens with osteoarthritis. Your body's designed to have that cartilage separation between bones of the joint, and when you lose that cartilage, then you lose that cushion. So it's also called degenerative joint disease, a fancy name for osteoarthritis. Let's look at these 4 periods for different articular joints, and this is looking at hundreds of individuals over the last 20 years. Hand, very low frequency. I don't have this first early mission period. We have pre-stroke foragers, pre-stroke farmers, late mission, the different joints of the skeleton, relatively low in these joints. Shoulder. One pattern that's emerging so far is a dip with farming, a decline in osteoarthritis, followed by an increase in the mission period, which shouldn't be a surprise because we know the Spanish basically extracted lots and lots of labor out of native populations. Let's look at this joint, the lumbar. Pretty high pre-stroke foragers, drops in farmers, huge increase in the mission period. Thoracic vertebra, same story. Cervical vertebra, same story. So the record appears to be in the spine, and that's the area that is most severely stressed in working in fields, carrying things, hard physical labor. So the story is here that indeed it plays out, the workload plays out in the skeleton. Lastly, the most recent kind of research, we've actually been working on this for more than 2 decades, but recently applied to these mission populations. We're looking at what are called cross-sectional geometric properties. We're looking at bones and the way they're structured just in the same way as an engineer would look at the skeleton as a construction. Engineers look at the skeleton as though they would look at a bridge or a building. And we have borrowed directly from civil and mechanical engineers these cross-sectional geometric properties. They measure the ability of the structure to withstand stress. Just like in a bridge. A bridge is put together with I-beams, and each one of those I-beams has been analyzed by an engineer to determine the weight load that beam can hold. And we apply the same thing to the skeleton, and I think a kind of a nifty way. And we're looking specifically at what are called second moments of area, which basically tells us how the bone is distributed in a cross-section, because that's a window onto the ability of the bone to withstand stress. We've been looking at the femur. Here's the hip area of the femur. Here's the knee area of the femur. At the humerus, upper arm, here's the shoulder, here's the elbow. And we're looking at sections to look at the distribution of the material in these cross sections. Now, in the years ago, we were able to cut the bone, but museum curators are becoming less and less excited about us cutting the bones in their collections. So we've been using CAT scans, computed axial tomography, to look at the cross-section. This is a non-invasive way of coming up with the cross-section. And we've been comparing these pre-contact and mission period Indians, looking at their cross-sections in the humerus and in the femur. And this PowerPoint, it must be your machine. That's okay, I won't blame you for it. But what we're seeing is a very, very different shape and size of these cross-sections. And can somebody tell me what the difference is between pre-contact Indians, before Europeans, and these mission Indians? What do you see there that's different? Yes, I saw hand signals in the back that in the mission period, the bones are wider And that fits in perfectly with engineering principles. That is, the further you distribute the material from a central axis, the stronger that material is, the greater the ability that material has in resisting bending and twisting, the ability of the bone to not break under high, severe loads. So these Indians are, in a sense, adapting to these new circumstances. That is, their bones have changed dramatically over time. These are not genetic changes. They are mechanical, behavioral changes that can occur in a relatively short amount of time. And for those of you who are Sigma Xi members, if you saw the last issue of American Scientist, think back. Maybe you looked at it, you didn't put it in your reading pile at home. Article by Chris Ruff, who I've been collaborating with us on this stuff, showing the cross-section of a professional tennis player, and her right arm is about double in terms of the bone size her left arm. That reflects about 20 years of physical activity using the arm. And so our bones respond in the very short term to physical stress. So if you still have that issue at home, look at the article by Chris Ruff in the American Scientist. So very, very telling in terms of adaptation. So just to conclude here, what are the implications for our study? Number one, the shift from foraging to farming in this setting, and globally we now understand, is a reduction in health. That is a global development that's occurring worldwide. Once people get agriculture, their health declines. Things go to crap, pretty much. With missionization and colonization, what do we see here? In this setting, we saw further declines in health. This, too, is a global phenomenon. It didn't occur just in North America or South America, but once Europeans arrive, anywhere they set foot, things go to crap, basically. Nowhere do we see improvements. That's the story of globalization in the last 500 years. Then, just a couple of other important implications. There's a decrease in workload prior to European contact in this setting. Very, very interesting change over time. And with missionization and European colonization, a dramatic increase in workload that's reflected in osteoarthritis and these bone cross-sections. And just to kind of sum up, one reason why I agreed to do the article for Scientific American is they do wonderful art. And I just gave them a sketch with some slides, and they came up with this thing that shows very beautifully all these changes that have taken place in this setting, and just a remarkable wealth of information that we can gather from human remains about the ancient human past. It's all written right there in the skeleton. And so just acknowledge National Science Foundation, various institutions, and this has been a long-term project, and after a while you begin to accumulate these endowments and foundations that have supported the research. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Do you have any?
Yes, I will be happy to answer any challenges.
One here.
Yes.
The onset of farming may have reduced the health of the individual people, but it increased the population greatly, didn't it?
Yes, that's a paradox. That is, farming, there's a decline in health, so things get kind of bad, right? But in terms of an evolutionary sense, there's an increase in population, which in terms of evolution, that's what you want. Basically, you want to get more people reaching reproductive age, and then so what? What if health is worse? Yep. No, that's very good point. Yeah. Yes.
Earlier, you had slides where they switched to farming prehistoric times. Seems to got worse. I think it was dentation and iron.
Yes.
And then when it went to early mission, it got better for
Yes.
some time. Was there a reason behind that?
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that because we've looked at the other missions as well, early mission, and those other missions seem to show a continued decline. That is, a more cribobortalia, more infections, more carries. What we think we have here is and I sort of hinted at the beginning of my talk that Santa Catalina on St. Catherine's Island played a very important role in Spanish control of this territory. And we think that the things were actually improved in terms of stuff that the Spanish brought to these Indians, that they were treated somewhat better. That's the only thing I can come up with in terms of showing these markers of health, because there is a slight improvement in quality of life as we've measured them with these markers. Yep. Yes.
What about the Spanish population in these islands?
Yeah, it's a pretty small population, but they're significant. There are priests, there are soldiers. Each one of these missions have a garrison, and we've never found their skeletons. I've been very interested in looking at them because they died there, they were buried there, but we've never found any of them except in St. Augustine. There have been a few Spaniards found, but in these missions, they're somewhere else. They weren't taken back to Spain. They're there somewhere, and we don't have them. But I'd love to see them, because there's two sides of the story. There's what happened to the Indians, and then there's what happened to Spaniards, and things were not good for them either. And I'd like to see their skeletons. Yeah.
Were the Native Americans forced to work? Was it come back to the mutual agreement?
Yeah, it's a forced kind of condition. Yeah. We have not been able to see any benefits for the Native population. Yeah. Yes.
The other places on the North continent, or at least in now the United States, where Spaniards and Indians interacted, were in New Mexico and on the California coast. There were also big missions.
Right.
Especially on the California coast, they were established later,
Right.
and there was a lot more cattle involved in.
Yes.
Certainly that was the industry of cattle raising. I believe that was a major part of the diet as well.
That's right.
Do you expect to see similar patterns, or does anybody know?
Yeah, Philip Walker, the bioarchaeologist, has worked on Spanish samples populations in California, and unfortunately the record is not very complete. He's looked at a couple of different missions, and the remains are very fragmentary and only suggestive. But the availability of cattle as a protein source seems to have improved conditions than compared to here. Yeah.
We always guess on how many cookies and apple cider to have. I think we're a little
Yes.
short tonight.
Yes.
But we don't want any of that to go to waste. I'm sure Dr. Larson will be around if you have any questions. Just give me one more hand to thank for really
Good. Thank you for coming. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks, Harry. I enjoyed it.
That's your watch off there. Nice job.
Thank you.
Talking nonsense. I heard him Gateway. I did just realize, it just occurred to me, this is reunion. He's upstairs. So, yeah, I'll just basically right. Yeah, or unless I go downstairs. I was thinking the Gateway, and yeah, no wonder I was like, why build some Gateway?
Yes, that's a good idea. Thank you.
I put a logo. Actually, very quick. Just touch base about tomorrow morning because I had a geographic dislocation. I thought we were staying down the gateway. So it's right here. If you're here, I'll just meet you up by the mountain tomorrow morning. Okay? And then if I pull up, I'll just do it. Okay? Just don't come out and stand on the road. It's too cold to come and stand on the road. So about 5:15. See you next time. Quite aware that I have. My wife says, grow gracefully and accept what comes. It's white air. No, exactly. How are you guys doing? I saw you walking around with a cane. Here's another thing.
You were right, you could do that.
Actually think of feet.
Oh, I was going to ask if the dating focus diets, did you come across any like of this
Word out to me. We appreciate it. This is one of the things I like those things I've done. Try to go for yes, there's an incredible statistical items. The listing of what you choose from designates them as general, public, or specialist. And so they'll give a specialist or in an earlier day to class.